Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the economic situation of Pakistan. What exactly is happening? We are getting to know that remittances, they are almost hitting all-time high every month. This time it was around 2.3 billion in 1 month. Last month I'm talking about. Other than that, now IMF staff and the Pakistani authorities have also reached an agreement on a package of measures to complete the second to fifth reviews of the authorities reform program supported by the IMF Extended Fund Facility. This was a press release by the International Monetary Fund. Then there is another linked story that says the package strikes an appropriate balance between supporting the economy, ensuring debt sustainability, and advancing structural reform. Now, these are the three major areas. They further state that pending approval of the Executive Board, the reviews completion would be released around US $500 million. The COVID-19 shock temporarily disrupted Pakistan's progress under the EFF-supported program. However, the authorities' policies and the allowing higher than expected COVID-related social spending have been critical in supporting the economy and saving lives and households. So we'll just take a short break, and after the break, we'll come back and we'll continue our program. Welcome back after the break. Now, a couple of tweets from the Federal Minister on Finance and Revenue, Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh says, I would like to share that the government of Pakistan has reached a staff-level agreement with the International Monetary Fund. Overcoming the challenges created by the pandemic has required concerted effort. Now, it further states that I would like to thank the Prime Minister for his guidance and all my colleagues and the IMF staff for their support. This is a good development for Pakistan. And Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, states that I want to thank our overseas Pakistanis for responding so strongly to State Bank of Pakistan's Roshan digital accounts. 87,833 accounts opened from 97 countries around the world. $500 million sent to Pakistan in just 5 months. Momentum continues to rise with $243 million coming in last 6 weeks alone. Now, to talk about this, let me introduce you to our panelists quickly. We have with us Sardar Yasir Khan, the President of Islamabad Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's with us in our studio. Thank you very much, Sardar, for your time. And we'll be joined in by Dr. Salman Shah, former Finance Minister. Dr. Saab is joining us on Skype. Dr. Saab, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ji.
And we have with us Zia Bande, Senior Economist. Zia Saab, thank you very much for your time as well, sir. Now, starting off from you, sir, when Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh Saab says that this is a good development for Pakistan, sir, I believe that whosoever was in power, even Dr. Hafiz Sheikh Saab, when he was in the previous comments, used to always criticize. I mean, there's a way to take money from IMF. There are certain conditions attached to it. But getting money, but at the end of the day, you have to return it as well. Now, this is a good development for the structural reforms, for the purpose of having some sort of implementation of certain rules and regulations. Why do we need such huge amounts just for the sake of reforms? I fail to understand where exactly does this money go? Because at the end of the day, the taxpayer of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan, they have to pay. No matter where it has gone eventually in first phase, how it is going to be distributed, for what sort of purposes is it is going to be utilized, and is this something good for Pakistan? Sardar Sahab, let's be candid, let's be honest. Your take, sir.
Well, personally, I don't think there's any long-term benefit really. $500 million is not a big amount.
Yeah.
I promise you, if you ask the local businessmen, there's quite a few businessmen in Pakistan that can pay you that kind of money. So I think we didn't have to go to IMF to just get $500 million. In the long term, I'm not seeing anything sustainable. The primary reason is, look, you already have a bleeding economy, you have a bleeding system. So in the bleeding system, if you inject $500 million or $1 billion, it's going to leak out anyway. And exactly what you said, that the government is the one getting that loan. But at the end of the day, it's us, the taxpayer, who has to pay it back. So we need to find out where that money is going to be spent. We need to justify that amount. I mean, they need to justify to us and explain to us that this money is going to be used on these projects. Now, when we talk about infrastructure, we keep relying on CPEC and we keep relying on the Chinese. So infrastructure is not being done by us. We're talking about healthcare and schooling, and I don't see any progress in the last 3 years there. And again, with regards to the pandemic, they've said that this is going to help us overcome the COVID-19 scenario. But then again, my question is, what have we spent in the local economy? What have we given back to the local businesses? Because we haven't received a penny in terms of a bailout package. None of the sectors have received any penny. Yes, we are coming up with different policies to help us, but there's nothing tangible on ground. And also with regards to the pandemic, again, I look at FBR, and FBR hasn't given us any relief. In fact, right now, if you look at the recent the issues that they're giving out to us, notices, there's issued a new notice with regards to Section 182, where they're stipulating that you've got to pay penalties on the late payment of filing of taxes. Again, I don't see that being viable for anybody. It's a time when you should have actually given us relief. You should have given us installment plans, deferrals, and instead you're penalizing the businessmen. So exactly, correlating with what's happening with IMF, you're getting at 500 million now. You're going to get another 500 million, 400 million down the line. But at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer that has to pay this money back, and we're already being scrutinized beyond means. So if you're going to scrutinize us further, we're going to say thank you very much. We don't need this money.
This is exactly what is happening. But Dr. Saab, IMF, I remember when you were the finance minister, and prior to that, you were the advisor advisor to the former prime minister on finance. Dr. Saab, I still remember our former prime minister, Shaukat Aziz Saab, used to say that, we have finally, in Urdu, he said that, हमने IMF का कशकोल तोड़ दिया. Sir, वो कशकोल टूटा नहीं टूटा? What exactly is the current situation? Because borrowing money from left, right, and center, it's not that we don't have to return it at the end of the day. I fail to understand when I hear people from Pakistan Muslim League that, blaming the PTI that they have taken this amount of money, which we hadn't. You're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars, sir. And look at our debt to GDP ratio. Look at the overall debt on Pakistan. Look at the conditions. I fail to understand. Dr. Saab, since you are an expert in this field, let's educate us.
Well, Faisal, one thing is clear, that we were in an IMF program, and this program was primarily a result of a balance of payment crisis and a debt crisis, combined with a public financial management system being totally out of balance. And when we went to the IMF at that time, people should recall that we had a current account deficit of about $20 billion. And we also had to repay about $10 billion on loan repayments. And we didn't have the money. There was no money in the kitty, and our reserves were just $10 billion. And those two could not be used for debt servicing because, you need to have some reserves at least. So the country was basically bankrupt, and you had to go to the IMF as a last resort. And according to the IMF program, it is a 3-year program, and it is the financial programming for the IMF. The projections were that the IMF is not going to give you a huge amount of money. It's only around $6 billion over the 3 years. But along with the IMF comes the money from the international financial institutions, and that money was projected to be around $38 billion over this IMF program period. And the reason for this explosive growth in debt is that once you cross a limit on your debt capacity, you're not even able to pay the debt servicing from your revenues, and you have to get additional debt to pay for those for debt servicing. So one factor which keeps the debt going up is that you need more debt to pay for the debt servicing. Number two, under the IMF program, you have a primary deficit of about 0.5% or somewhat in that area, which means that every year you are going to accumulate some debt because of that. And until the investments, foreign investment really starts to kick in, this debt financing would be needed just to continue with the status quo. Now, I think the IMF program has achieved its objectives in terms of stability. You have a market-based exchange rate. You have an interest rate which is connected to inflation, and you are trying to keep at least the expected inflation kind of the interest rate based on expected inflation. It has to be positive, and you're maintaining the primary deficit target. Now, this means that you are going to be in a very low orbit of economic growth because all these things are not meant for growth. Where will the growth come from? Growth comes from that once your currency is competitive, you will see that exports can go up. There will not be a bias against the exports, and your imports will become expensive. So there will be some kind of a substitution effect in terms of not only uh, the imports being displaced by domestic production, but also exports growth will also need to some GDP growth within the country. And so the only way left for further growth is going to be improving the productivity and competitiveness of of the real sector, and that needs a lot of reforms. And particularly in the energy sector, we still have to do lots of reform to
But Dr. Saab,
bring
my
the cost
question again, why do
down,
we need these
and
millions and
also
billions of dollars for the reforms? I mean, what's the rocket science in that? Prime Minister's got so many special assistants. He's got a whole team of economic managers. I mean, top of the line people. But still, I mean, I fail to, and some of the people were in the previous governments. Dr. Hafiz Sheikh has been a part of the Pakistan People's Party's government. Then he was the minister for the federal government over there. I fail to understand what exactly is going on, sir, because when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, that's overwhelming, crossed the total amount of the total GDP of Pakistan. It is well over 100%. You talk about inflation, sir, our interest rate was hovering around 14%, whereas 0% interest rate during the COVID days was in America and almost quarter percent, I would say, if I'm not wrong, in UK. Now you've halved it. We don't see any growth, sir. 1.5% growth. I remember when you were the person in charge for the finance, we end up having 8.6% growth rate, right, sir? I fail to understand what exactly is going on, sir. You talk about the
that's
remittances;
exactly
they have a
no,
very different reason for the increase. You talk
no,
about a couple of other major indicators. Honestly speaking, Dr. Saab, they are so confusing now.
no, but that's what I'm telling you, that you are almost in a straitjacket, that over the next 3 years, the projections are that this debt will continue to go up until your other reforms kick in, and until your productivity and competitiveness of the economy improves, which means basic reforms in the energy sector, bringing the cost of energy down, which means that your FBR is able to have a simplified tax system which is pro investment, which means that you get non-debt investment coming into the country, foreign direct investment, and from overseas Pakistanis, and that your remittances can further grow up, and you can be able to finance some of these deficits through non-debt financing. Now, that is something which will depend upon uh, investments going up, investment to GDP going up to at least 20-25%, and that needs a lot of work, and it needs a great improvement in business confidence. It means that your ease of doing business is really easy. You have major deregulation, which also means that you need to have privatization, an effective privatization, which means that the state-owned enterprises would stop bleeding, and you are going to fix all of those. And you know that this is something which has been lingering on for so long that it's
I think so. That's been lingering on since 60s. But anyway, sorry to cut you here. Let me have a quick word with Bande Saab. Now, Bande Saab, we have done so many programs on the economy of Pakistan, and you have come up with so many solutions, so many remedies. But looking at the current situation, Dr. Saab talked about that the GDP and investment ratio should be around 20 to 25%. I mean, everything should be ideal. But nothing is ideal at all, sir. Maybe perhaps you're talking about a country like South Korea or something of that sort. But over here, when we look at the details and these figures and the facts, and honestly speaking, they're alarming, aren't they?
Faisal, we can have a wish list and we can talk about so many things that there should be done. But have you ever talked about this political economy, the sort of a political economy Pakistan has? Will it allow that sort of a reforms or that sort of a wish list to be fulfilled? That is a question because the Pakistan
And I
has
swear,
gone.
it seems Pakistan is the ideal, subject for that.
No, I tell you one thing. We have gone into IMF program for 22 times. 8.6% of a GDP growth in Musharraf's era. And in 2008, Pakistan went for an IMF program bailout package for $7.6 billion. Now, the point is this is why we are coming into this sort of things after every few years. Every few years, we have this problem and we talk about the same thing, ease of doing business, competitiveness. So why it is not happening on the ground? Because you have a very elite political system which is not allowing this more multidimensional, more multi-class sort of a growth in the society. That's why you're going again and again in it. I tell you, current account deficit is not a big deal. All the countries, many countries have current account deficit, but it is about the percentage of that of deficit to your GDP and to your capacity. As Salman Saab has rightly said that we are into double limbo. We have a deficit coming from the debt side also, and we have a deficit coming from this trade side also, which we have to serve. Just look at Bangladesh. If you're looking at Bangladesh only, I was just looking at their numbers. And 2010, I believe their exports were less than Pakistan, $18 billion. At that time, Pakistan were having an exports about $23 billion. And after 10 years, if you see, Bangladesh has crossed $48 billion. And Pakistan is still about $28 or $26 billion. Now, these are the real questions which we need to ask. That why? I mean, so IMF program is a reality. We have to go. We have to get a bailout. But there's no 2 point. As Salman Saab has very clearly said, that is not only IMF program. It's basically the money which is coming in where you have to sustain your debt. And you have a very potent questions, which Yasir also basically addressed, that why, where we are spending this money. That is a question. And that brings us to the governance side, governance of the country, of the state. And unfortunately, Faisal, we have talked before also, we have a very top-down approach in running the country. This is not the way, because in this the sort of a system, you will be having more wastage of resources, and you will be burdening the country with more and more debt.
Absolutely.
I mean to say that's what you have to see. That what is the problem? I mean to say these are all symptoms which you are talking about. These deficit, these loans. The main crux lies with the governance. And wherever the countries where you have seen reforms, I sometimes at loss to understand that we have so competitive the civil services exams. We have line of bureaucrats. We have line of a very training systems, and we are sending these officers, very able officers, to get training where? To US, to Harvard, to Oxford, to European universities. Why don't we send them to learn in the Grameen system, the Grameen experience? Why don't we send them to Bangladesh? Why don't we send them to Rwanda, with the country which
They
has
won't like going there because Europe is Europe.
exactly?
America is
Why don't
America.
we?
More party, more fun. Honestly, because sir, I've got so many friends who are senior bureaucrats. I exactly know. I wish I could talk about it on the national TV, but that's the way, sir. Grameen, I think, is a great example for the region. You're absolutely spot on. Yes.
These people, I mean to say, the problem which we are facing, all these countries have faced. How these countries have come out? Rwanda is an excellent example. Na? That country for the last 10 years is sustaining a GDP growth of 7.5%. at a population of about 10 to 12 million people. Okay. And it is basically following the Singaporean model, the way they want to work. Now, why don't our people go over there in Rwanda and see how they have done their agriculture, how they have revived their agriculture over there? Now, these are the questions which we need to ask, and we need to have some serious solutions on that. Imran Khan regime has talked about devolution through this local government system, but we have yet to see it. That what will be the contours, how it's going to come up. We still have a very, I mean to say, look at Punjab. Punjab on standalone basis will be the 12th largest country in the world. And the way it is governed, it's in a very centralized system. It no bigger than these countries are run like Punjab is run from Lahore. You're running from Attak to Rahim Yar Khan in a very centralized manner. I don't think so. Punjab or any other, I mean to say, geographical entity will be able to optimize their economic potential with this sort of a governance system.
All right. Now, Sardar Sahab, you have heard what Dr. Sahab said, you have heard what Bande Sahab just said. Honestly speaking, I mean, we keep on talking about the economic indicators. We keep on talking about the previous governments and their wrongdoings, which eventually end up resulting in whatever is happening at the moment. Honestly speaking, sir, let's not blame only one government. It's a series. You know, it's a chain of events. I mean, one did this and this was the result of that after 4 or 5 years. You can't change the country which hasn't been able to change itself in the last 72 years. And let's not blame the country. The people are supposed to be blamed. Over here, sir, honestly speaking, when the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was in power, I remember the former Prime Minister and the person in charge for the education side, the special envoy to the Secretary General of United Nations, was visiting Pakistan. Top-notch ministers were there, including Mariam Nawaz and Ishaq Dar and Baligh ur Rahman. And Prime Minister then also said that, you know, we'll take it to 4% of our GDP, 4%. And you know exactly what has been done. There are issues, because if the nation is educated, things would change. There are certain set of people who are very powerful. They don't want the nation to change. If the economic dynamics would change, everything is going to change. Everyone is going to be on the same level. And that is not suitable for many people, A. Secondly, sir, when you talk about the economic reforms, I fail to understand the rocket science involved. If the private sector can make rockets and take it up to the space, we can't do the basic reforms, and we need people from IMF and all over the world to sort it out. Is it the will, or is it the capacity, or is it the productivity level, or as Dr. Saab earlier mentioned, is it the competitiveness? Where are we lacking? Everywhere, I guess?
Intention. We lack intention. I think that's what we need. We need to align everybody on one page. I think we need to align everybody with the PM's vision. He's very sincere and patriotic with the country, and I think that's not transpiring out to the rest. We're not seeing that cohesion across the entire team, and I think that's the setback. Look, with regards, again, the burden of loan, the burden of IMF, now you're already seeing the trickling effect now as of today. We're not going to criticize the past. We're looking at the present and the future.
Yeah.
I have a very focused approach. Now, what's missing is that bridge. Now, you've taken a loan now, you're taking a further loan, and already you've decreased the tariffs a few months ago, and you're increasing the tariffs again. We've taken the electricity tariffs to 1.95 rupees per unit. That's going to have a burden of about 200 billion rupees on the taxpayer and obviously on the industry as well. And we're not going to be competitive like we were a couple of months ago. Again, you're seeing the same thing with the fuel prices.
And this is the exact amount. If you just control your leakages, yes, you can do that. So that is the governance part.
That's the question. Exactly what my colleagues have said, that with regards to the loans, with regards to the funding coming from IMF, going towards state-owned enterprise and state-owned organizations, different organizations like CDA, LDA, KDA, these are organizations that are overstaffed. You've got PIA as a fine example, an airline which set an example for the world, one of the top 5, and now is bleeding simply because of the overstaffing, overheads. And that's the same dilemma with every other organization that is run by the government. So, who's going to justify paying those salaries, running those organizations which are in losses for years and are still going to be losses in the years to come? So this is where we need restructuring, and you can get that done by involving the private sector. Either you privatize or you involve the private sector and have them on the board of directors, board of governance, where we can dictate policy. Because if we're running our businesses, we can run those companies as well. And going back to FBR, Recently, we've just heard from different institutions, including different associations like jewelers, who've come to me and said that, you know what, they're now dictating, their departments are dictating and telling us that we need to have a trail of the last 5-year transactions. We also need to ask our customers where this fund has come from. I, as a retailer, why on earth or what authority do I have to ask a consumer where you bought these funds from? Now, the problem in our country is now, even with regards to the budget coming in, we've not been taken on board. All the Chamber of Commerce represent all the taxpayers in Pakistan. We're the ones driving the economy. We've not been taken on board with regards to the upcoming policy or upcoming budget. They're going to design it, devise it, implement it, and force us to follow. That's not the right approach. It's not going to be conducive. It's not going to be supportive. It's not going to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And that's the disconnect. So we need to bridge that gap, and that can only be done by taking us on board where we can have productive policy. We have no personal mandate here. We're looking at the national interest. Our interest is national interest because we've spent our hard-earned money and sweat into this country for the betterment of the future of the country, betterment of the business, economic development, economic revival, and obviously creating employment. And we want to be competitive. Now, let me tell you some of the things that we're missing. We don't need this fund from IMF if we look at the country's capacity. Like Bande Saab said, we're struggling to go above $25 billion in terms of export. That's a joke considering the size and scale of this country. In terms of agro alone,
Look at Bangladesh.
yeah, that's exactly, it's a classic example. If they're touching 48 billion, it's a joke that we're still at 25 billion. In terms of the scale of the country, we're larger in terms of population and land size, 800,000 square kilometers. That's a huge country. We're larger than most, and yet we still don't have over 100 billion in terms of agro, in terms of IT, in terms of textile. We should be well over $200 billion. Let me tell you some of the basic sectors.
You
we're
talk about
overlooking.
services. Honestly speaking, what have we done in IT?
What about tourism? IT is nothing.
Nothing.
$900
Sir,
million.
tourism would need, no matter if it's free tourism, I end up giving you a first-class flight in a 7-star hotel, but if it is not safe, will you visit?
You got to privatize it.
Simple as that.
Well, look, private sector example is Salier. Look at them. They've set an example that the private sector can do it. They've done it right. They've got an airport. They've got an airline. So there's a lot more we can do. The reason I bring tourism into this, and the numbers are interesting. If you look at Dubai, Dubai is just one city. Dubai's numbers last year in terms of their GDP contribution was about 11% contribution from tourism alone. That's $28 billion. If you look at the UK, much larger market, they generate about 106 billion pounds from tourism alone, and they created about 2.3 to 3 million jobs. What about Pakistan? Pakistan can easily exceed over 70 to 80 billion minimum dollars in terms of tourism alone, and in terms of employment, you're looking at well over 5 to 8 million people. So we're not even focusing on that sector. We haven't even revised policy.
Turkey is another example right in front of you.
Absolutely. Turkey, they've created one drama, and look at the population of Turkey. Look at the land size, much smaller than Pakistan, yet they're producing much more. Their GDP is much higher. So it's all about policy. When we're looking at structural reforms, they have to start in-house. We can devise
If you
policy.
remember, Sadar Saab, when the Turkish authorities shot down that jet of Russia and the tourists stopped coming, forget about the energy deals and forget about the remittances which were coming from Russia through the Turkish workers. I'm just going to give you the example of the tourism. $11.5 billion worth of tourism, 1 year, only from Russia to Turkey.
So do we really need the IMF loan when you're looking at these kind of numbers? Of course not, but we're not focusing on those areas. We're not focusing on reforms or anything with regards to economic revival or long-term sustainable economic development. That can only be done by policy. You've got to take us on board. Listen to those people who understand numbers. Listen to those people who understand business. Those are the people who can advise and form policy which will be better and conducive and sustainable in the long term. There's one more thing which is really important. Again, I look at export, but I'll also look at the ease of doing business in Pakistan. We are trying to attract foreign investment. Now, the $2 billion which have come in, again, it's not primarily because of our policies. It's just because people are patriotic and they love Pakistan, and this is where they come home to. We say we were born here, we're going to die here. So that's just us being patriotic. The fundamental aspect is we still need to promote that Pakistan's open for business, and ease of doing business is easier now than it was before, and we're not working on that. We're not working on made in Pakistan. We keep going to every single forum because we discuss with foreign missions as well as all the embassies that we want you to come in and take benefit of the special economic zones that have been made in Pakistan. Yet the response we get from them is we're not comfortable setting up companies in Pakistan because we think that our investors are not comfortable coming to Pakistan because ease of doing business is not really in place. You say it is, but it's not really in fact in place. And that's a setback for people like us who all day long try to market Pakistan, promote Pakistan, yet there's a huge disconnect. So them saying one thing, the government saying one thing, in reality, being on ground, there's a big difference. And we're trying to bridge that. We're trying to close that. But for that, they need to take us on board. BOI needs to take us on board. The Prime Minister needs to ask us to sit with them so we can advise on policy. See, like I said, we haven't got any mandate. We're not looking for personal benefits here. We're looking at the benefits for the country. Because irrespective of which government's in place, which government's today and which government's going to be tomorrow, we're still going to be here. We're the ones that are going to have to suffer and face IMF in the long run. So they're building this debt for us and our future generations to come, which is unacceptable.
Absolutely, spot on. Now, Dr. Saab, remedies, what should be done? I mean, over here, there's another story. IMF I mean, there's going to be another 700 billion rupees tax in the next fiscal year. When you talk about the FBR reforms, the reality is right in front of you. So many other areas. And the local businessman is so fed up, sir, honestly speaking, that why would we end up having the foreign investor in Pakistan, sir? You know the details, you know the statistics. Ji, Dr. Saab.
Gee, Faisal, I mean, I don't think it's the way it is being described that we are not doing anything. I think every day, 99% of the time of the Prime Minister is spent on economic reforms across the various value chains, right from construction to exports to agriculture to manufacturing services. The issue is that we have an entrenched kind of, I wouldn't call it a mafia, but the system is very entrenched. So let's take agriculture. Agriculture, we have at 1/3 of the global yields, even less than that. And what is needed? We need uh, the seed revolution. Now, the seed revolution, you can import it and pay for it, or your system, your own knowledge system, has to create it. So, our knowledge system is fossilized. We have agriculture universities who do no research. We have agriculture research institutes who have never produced new seed. They're scientists, there are thousands and thousands of scientists working over there, and they claim that they make all this seed, but the farmer doesn't get it. So the entire value chain from the knowledge base to the extension, agriculture extension, to farm support system, to water management, to logistics from the farm to the markets and from domestic production into exports. All the system is jammed up. It is fossilized. It has not, we have not invested in it. And to expect that now with the flick of your pen, you can change it, of course it will take time. Everything is known. I mean, you know what has to be done. It is a time consuming process. If you can't get the seed in, it's like garbage in, garbage out. And that's what we see in the agriculture sector. We have some of the best agriculture land, we have water, we have 60% of your population is working on agriculture, but our output, our competitiveness is zero. And to change all of that, you need uh, to ram through lots of things. And as you know, the political environment in the country, as Zia Bande was saying, it's not conducive to change because there are going to be winners in this, and lots of us are going to be winners. A few of us are going to be the losers. The losers are the cartels. The losers are those who have kind of a hold on the supply chains. Uh, the losers are the bureaucracy who create the special dispensation for various people and groups. And in that sense, if we deregulate everything, the public sector corporations will have to go because they will not be able to compete with the
Exactly, Dr.
if
Saab.
we
That's
get
where
the
we
private
need to
sector in.
have the private
This
sector
process, I
involved. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of a private-public, a partnership. Plus, I think the private sector could be the real catalyst for the change. Last comment from you, Zia Bande Saab.
getting the kind of communications to the people so them to be participating in this reform agenda because it is at this time I think I have seen many governments prime minister level at this point in time there is intense activity on the reform side and what we have seen in the construction area it has been deregulated substantially and the results are coming out to be very positive.
All right.
uh, our cities have
All right. Bande Saab,
generated
please.
Okay. I think so. It is already been, I mean, to say the PTI government is already aware of the problem. And I will only use one word which PTI has used in its flagship program of SRs, which is state capture. Pakistan is basically a victim of this state capture, and it is not unusual. It has been done in everywhere in the country. I mean, other developing countries also are the victim of it. And as Salman Saab have said that he's not using the word mafia, but I mean to say the government itself is using, and they have used for this sugar mafia, wheat mafia, the petroleum mafia,
These
and so many all
cartels,
things.
they are more powerful
Cartels.
than.
So the government is well aware of the factor, and I understand we have to give the government the space also to work around. It's not easy. It's not for PTI or PPP or PMLN. All these cartels and mafias, they basically integrated in the system very well. So what is important for us, if you want to, I will just repeat again, the main remedy is to decentralize things. Irrespective of the space and the capacity which is available, decentralize things, make things more competitive at the lower level. Why don't Yasser basically stand for this mayor election of Islamabad? He's the businessman, he knows more about the problems of Islamabad than anybody else. They should be leading, these business community should be leading their cities. Then the regeneration will be much better than the so-called commissioners which are leading it, if chambers are leading the cities and their governance. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bani Saab. It was a pleasure having you, Salman Shah Saab. And Yas Saab, thank you so much for your presence as well. And that's all we have for this Saab. I'll see you again, inshallah, tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.